But yeah, I mean, that for me was my personal moment where, like, I realized that we had, crossed the line, and that video games were now going to be showing me some pretty amazing stuff, graphically and sound wise and in terms of presentation. And I feel like it totally lived up to that initial promise of seeing that ActRaiser logo. Not only the game ActRaiser, which was awesome, but like the rest of the 16-bit era.
The Super NES library is kind of weird because I feel like the games in the first 6 months or so were so much more experimental and innovative, and like people were really trying crazy things with all this new hardware power that Nintendo gave them.
Ultraman.
Like if you compare stuff like, stuff like Contra 3, Super Castlevania 4. Like level 4 of Super Castlevania 4 is in itself pretty much like the ultimate Super NES sales pitch. It's like, here's every ridiculous thing that the Super NES hardware can do, and you can whip your way through it. That's awesome. But later in the system's life, you tended to see more kind of standard platformers, and sometimes people would do little spinny things with Mode 7, but you never really saw that kind of like super wild, dramatic, ambitious design outside of a few games.
Pilot Wings, I thought, was a good tech demo for the Super Nintendo. I mean, that's the one that really solidified the sort of like scaling and rotation thing to me. When you're skydiving and you're actually seeing the ground come up, like that was revolutionary to me at the time. Like I felt like I was actually inhabiting a space. I didn't really feel like that on any other system.
Yeah, it was Mode 7 was a very, very simple thing, right? It was sprite scaling and rotation.
Yep.
But if you used it correctly, you could...
Which most people did not.
Which most people did not. But if you were able to use it correctly, you could really give people for the first time that little glimpse of a taste of a 3D world.
Yeah. I always appreciated when developers used that Mode 7 effect really subtly. Like in the Final Fantasy games, when you go out into the overworld, the world just kind of tilts back a little bit, and some sprites pop up, and it gives you this real sense of depth that you couldn't get from other systems, before the 3D thing took over.
Well, that's
that didn't like blow your mind or anything, but it really created this kind of sense of like, oh, this is something a little different, and they're really trying to give me a sense of like this vast world that I'm exploring and
well, that's kind of like what you were talking about with the Lunar 2 animated cutscenes, is that when you look at the beginning of 16-bit and towards the end, it's people, in the beginning it's just designers going crazy and using all of these new little hardware tricks that are free because they're built into the hardware and that are at their disposal, and then it's kind of like taking a step back and saying, okay, let's use these in more subtle, smarter ways. Like the way that Yoshi's Island was a Super FX game. It wasn't like Star Fox Polygon Super FX. It was done in more subtle ways that kind of...
I don't know. To me, that game, I was just going to suggest it as a recommendation of a game that's totally showing off. Because it's doing some stuff that you had never seen any other game do. And it's not using the Super FX chips to do 3D, but it's still...
Right.
It's like crazy stuff with platformers that no one had ever done before. And... a friend of ours, Jess Reagan.
Someone in there is a fan of crazy stuff.
In like 2001 or something, and he just sat there the entire time and was like, they're just showing off. Like, this seems fun, but they're just showing off. And he was really offended by the fact that they're showing off.
Oh.
He gets offended by stuff like that.
Well, yeah, he's a jerk.
I think...
He's here in the audience today now.
Jess? No. I think one of the most important things about the introduction of the Super Nintendo is that it was kind of the start of the console wars, where everyone at the schoolyard
turned brother against brother.
Yep, defending the Genesis. The Genesis, by the way, way fucking cooler than the Super Nintendo. Yeah. Genesis was like the punk rock system, like Nintendo was like the soft like Disney system, and then Genesis came in with like it's jazz. It was like in your face. It was really cool. It was like the Looney Tunes to like whatever the fuck Mickey Mouse was doing. Genesis was just awesome, and it welcomed me to the next level.
By doing what Nintendo didn't.
And by screaming at me in commercials incessantly. And also Sonic the Hedgehog was really cool,
Nintendo
and blast processing was also
the Play
cool.
It Loud campaign, which they got back in. What does? What? Doesn't suck.
What did he say?
Dance with zombies. Okay, you're right.
Eventually, Nintendo caught up, and they started detonating fat people in commercials.
Yeah, it didn't really work out for them, did it?
Yeah.
Because Sega was cooler. Sega... They did the Play It Loud thing as a desperate attempt to combat Sega's amazing marketing.
When their ad for Super Punch-Out was pictures of battered women. In your fucking face.
But I think one of the most notable things, we were talking about this at lunch, when Sega was coming out with Sonic 1 and Super Nintendo had, Mario World, they actually had public demonstrations where they're like, here's Mario World and here's Sonic. And like when you put them like next to each other, Sonic looks a lot like faster and meaner and sleeker than Mario World, which is a better game.
Does Sonic have 96 exits? I don't think so.
Whoa, 96.
96.
He doesn't have a yellow cape either.
And when you beat the game, do the enemies turn into pumpkins? I don't think they do.
No, they don't. There's just a fat guy juggling.
It's a little more subtle. You have to appreciate. It's the difference between like a wine cooler and a really great wine from Napa.
And I should say my rant just then about Sega being cooler was based on me being a child. In retrospect, the Super Nintendo had a better library. I'm just going to put that out there.
I think a lot of it appearing to be cooler had to do with the sports game stuff at the time.
Yep.
Was at least back then there was the perception that Electronic Arts supported Madden and NHLPA and all that sort of stuff, but the Sega versions were always better.
And had Deion Sanders on the cover.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that was...
Yeah, Deion Sanders.
Super NES had Bill Lambert's Combat Basketball.
That's true. It did have...
Come on.
And it had that crappy Mode 7 NCAA basketball game. Do you remember that? It was all like, look, it's moving, the
It was
court.
like playing basketball in the top-down stages of Contra 3. Who doesn't want that?
Yeah, the Sega had a pretty significant amount of Western support because it was much more popular here than it was in Japan.
Yep.
So you had Electronic Arts, and they put out a ton of stuff, and most of it isn't very good, but it exists. There's some interesting RPGs, though, like Techno Clash, which has,
it exists.
It has sort of like an awesome dude like passing a spell against a Terminator or something. It's really, really awesome looking. But Sega had a pretty significant amount of games that they published, too, like the Sega Technical Institute. Well, those the guys that I think developed Comic Zone?
Yep. They did Sonic Spinball also. They did...
The Ooze?
No one for the Ooze, huh?
Yeah, no one.
So that's all right. I think they did a lot of work on Sonic 2 and 3 also.
Yeah, that was our friend Mark Cerny.
Yep. And Steve Wojta, who's been on Retronauts, was a Sega Technical Institute employee.
That's
right. But the Super Nintendo, I don't know. When I think of the 16-bit era, I do think of the wars between Sega and Nintendo, both on my school play yard and
here in this auditorium.
So we're gonna actually stage a fight tonight at 10.
So yeah, if you could line up one side or the other, Sega versus Genesis.
I did eventually get a Super Nintendo. I got one Christmas of '94 because I really bought into Donkey Kong Country. I'm glad to hear some woos because I feel like I'm in the minority who still thinks it's a great game. Thank you.
And who doesn't think so?
Yeah, that guy in the back.
I guess they're the minority. That one guy, though, he hates it.
I'm with you, bro.
That guy's a Sega apologist. Oh, I have a very quick anecdote I want to share before it leaves my memory forever.
Okay.
I just got on eBay a bunch of arcade trade magazines from the 80s, and there's a letter in this 1987 issue from an arcade operator complaining that he's reluctant to buy any new Sega arcade games because they are so quick to introduce their next generation of technology in arcade games. So he bought
1987.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they've always done that.
Oh, they've screwed over everybody.
Even in
is what you're saying.
'87, they were pulling the Saturn thing on arcade operators, and I thought that was kind of amazing.
Right. Wow, I just brought home my brand new Sega CD. You're what? Kid, the 32X.
32X, you bitch. Yeah.
All right, I bought my 32X and I plugged in all three.
It's time for
giant
Saturn.
power adapters. Oh, God damn it.
So, in summary, Super NES is awesome.
Yeah.
Yay!
Anyway, I think we've probably talked enough now.
I think I want some
other people
Time for questions.
So there are
The whole thing about Retronauts now is that we're lazy and we just want to bounce off of your questions.
Two microphones.
ask us
Just better to
questions.
the microphone there.
Microphones.
No. Stand up and then walk to the
line up at the
microphone.
mics.
Don't just raise your hand.
So there's one in either
anyone
aisle
who wants
here.
to talk.
And let me
Anyone at all.
raise the stakes. Before this podcast started, I found $5 on the ground, and I could keep that myself. But I'm feeling generous. So whoever asks the most awesome question of all, you get this. I would say shiny, but I'd be lying. This not so shiny $5.
I do
Make
want
it
to
good.
That's mine.
I want to share something before the questions start while people are lining up. On the show floor today, Video Games New York is one of the booths. They sell old games. I got this Famicom game. It's called Action and Adventures Sherlock Holmes. And I don't know how many.
Like Professor Layton.
It's exactly.
It is high concept. Like that is what it is, right?
It's actually an action game where you are Sherlock Holmes running around the streets of London, gunning people down. I'm not making this up.
So it's the Robert Downey Jr. movie,
and it's got a drawing of a pig on it. So I'm really looking forward to going.
That's the rare variant, the pig drawing on the back variant.
All right.